I'm Hitman from the Hitman Blues Band, and this course is called Music Theory for the Easily Bored. Why did Herman Melville write so much filler in Moby Dick? Because he got paid by the word. Seriously. Why are music theory courses so boring and long and needlessly complex? Connect the dots, okay? Yes, like anything else, music theory can become complex, and we're going to touch on that. But more importantly, if you're a musician or a vocalist, you want stuff you can use now. Now, I strongly suggest that you have a pen and paper handy, or something you can write on. You can also download a free copy of this course, but it's better if you also write stuff down, because that way you're kind of taking notes. Now here's my first sheet here. Hopefully you can see this. This is where you can download. I gotta kind of lift this up so I can see it. This is where you can download the free manual for this course from. That's a short URL if you don't feel like typing all this stuff, but it's pretty easy. It's hitmanbluesband.com/theory.html. That'll open up a web page with a link on it that you can click, and you can download everything that you need. I'll be showing that later, and if somebody can maybe type this into the comments, then that would be cool too. I think I made a quick little post about this on the LIBS site, Facebook page. So there you go. All right, now let's go to Nashville. We need a simple framework to hang music theory on. So we'll start with the Nashville number system, which was developed to help musicians who can't or won't read music. How do you get a pianist to turn down? Take away the sheet music. How do you get a guitarist to turn down? Pull out some sheet music. No music reading is required for this course. Now, I'm going to assume that you either can't read music or you don't want to at this moment, so you just want to start by understanding some basic music theory. In order to explain that, we're going to use the Nashville number system. But first, let's get situated. For people who already know this, please bear with me. I'm just starting off from the very beginning. This won't take long. Just hang in there. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the keyboard. You got white keys, you got black keys. Okay? The white keys are the natural notes, and they go from A through G. Now, this is a C note. It's the lowest note on my keyboard. The black keys are the in-between notes. There's a total of 12 notes in Western music. That's it. Every song you have ever heard is made up of a combination of 12 notes. So why do we need in-between notes? Well, short answer, it's how our musical system works. We'll go over that a little bit later, but we just need to get started here. So, stay with me. See this first group? This is a C. That is a C sharp. That means it's higher than C. That's D. That's a D sharp. Higher than D. Here's an E. Who stole the E sharp? Well, there isn't one. It goes right from E to F. Why? Because there's actually a real answer for this, and it involves overtones and equal temper tuning system and a whole bunch of stuff that we really don't have to get into right now. Now, if you look further along, there's another couple of notes that also don't have a black key. This is B and C. So what you've got is two notes, E to F and B to C, that just go right to each other. Now, here's another important thing. Let's look at this C sharp. It's higher than C, but it's also lower than D. So it's called also a D flat. C sharp can also be called a D flat, and now it's complicated. How do you know when to call it a D flat? How do you know when to call it a C sharp? What if you call it the wrong name? Will it get angry? Will it break your instrument? Will you get threatening emails? We'll cover it. So, the key of what? People talk about they're in the key of something. When we say that we're in the key of C, what we mean is, if you were to sing Do, Re, Mi, and go all the way up, you'd be singing a scale. And if you start that on the note that sounds when you hit a C, you can go all the way up without hitting any of the black keys. I never said I was a keyboard player, okay? So, if you can go all the way up like that, starting on that note, C, we would say that we are in the key of C. All of the notes in the key of C are natural notes, meaning that we don't have to hit any of these black keys at all. As you're going to see in a minute, by using only natural notes for our next step, it makes it a little less complicated. Now, reading music for people who don't want to read music and are not going to learn. There are 7 white keys on the keyboard. We're using this piano keyboard because it's easy to see, and it repeats itself every 12 keys. Here's a C, you go up 12 keys, you got another C. Go up 12 keys, and if this was a bigger keyboard, you would have another C. So, it's kind of easy to see. Looking at this, we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. It loops around. There is no H in music. It just goes right to an A from the G. Let me see. A system was needed to talk about notes that would work no matter what key you're in, and even if you can't read music on a musical staff, it would have to work. It would have to work for notes, and it would have to work for chords. Chords. Quick definition of chords. A chord is any 3 notes hit at the same time, 3 or more notes. Usually, if you're only hitting 2 notes, we call it a double stop. And 1 note, of course, is a note. So, let's get back to them. Notes. Now, if we have the key of C, right, where we went up the scale and it was all natural notes, what happens if you raise everything by half a step? You have the key of C sharp, right? If C was all natural and you just raised everything half a step, now everything is sharp. Now there's a better way of calling it than C sharp. We're going to get into that. But that is pretty extreme. So let's use an example of the key of A, which we use in blues and rock all the time. If I want to play Do, Re, Mi in the key of A, where do I do this? Oh, okay. I'm kind of looking at things backwards here. So we have A. This is the A note, by the way. I'm starting on. Okay. I had to hit 3 black keys in order to do Do, Re, Mi. So we need to have a system that's going to work no matter what key you're in, whether it has sharps or flats in it, or whatever it is, and that is the Nashville number system. So in this system, we're going to start with the number 1, and that's usually going to be written as Roman numeral. Now, don't you wish you paid more attention in 3rd grade when they were teaching you Roman numerals instead of reading comics and eating Play-Doh? It's not too late. We're going to use the key of C because, as I said, it has no sharps and no flats. And we're going to say that C is number 1. That makes D number 2, E is number 3, F is number 4. 3, 4, and 5 are important, so bear this in mind. F is number 4, G is number 5, A is 6, B is 7, and C again is 8, or the octave. We're going to use this with both notes and chords. A major chord is usually just referred to without the word major, like you'll say a C chord or an A chord. Now it's made up, as I said, of a combination of 3 or more notes. A major chord is made up of 3 notes from whatever key you're in. It would be the first note in that key, the third note, and the fifth note. So we'll get into building, chords and how you do it a little bit later. But if you play C is 1, D, E is 3, F and G is 5, right? F is 4, G is 5. So if you do C, E, and G, you're playing a C chord. I'm going to play one right now. Okay, what's that? Oh, you already know how to play a stupid C chord? Yeah, but did you know why you were hitting those notes? Now you do. And if you're on guitar, you might say, yeah, smart guy, I'm hitting 6 notes, not 3. Look closer. If you're hitting a C chord, let's say an open C chord, you're actually hitting duplicates of the same note. You're hitting 3 E notes, open low E string, then a middle E, and then a high E. You're hitting 2 C's and 1 G. So you're really still hitting 3 notes. You're just hitting octaves of them. So if you're a single note instrument, like let's say a horn or sax or flute, or you're using your voice, then you have to hit the notes one note at a time. When you play the notes in a chord one note at a time, it's called an arpeggio. Don't blame me. I didn't decide to use Italian for musical terms. But that's what it is. It's an arpeggio. You can call it an arp for short, because 4 syllables is far too many syllables to say. So let's try an exercise. We'll start on a G note. Now, the key of G, as we're going to find out later, has 1 sharp, but it doesn't affect us for coming up with a G major chord. G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, D is 5. So G, B, D. Those are the notes in a G major chord. It doesn't matter what chord you're playing. It will always be the 1, 3, and 5 of whatever that chord might be. An A chord, an E flat chord, an F chord. F is 1. It's always going to be in an F chord. It's always going to be 1, 3, and 5 of that. This is an important concept. We're going to be building on it. If you're the kind of person who likes to really delve into things, you can go to Wikipedia and look up Nashville number system. And it's a little dry, but it gives a really good explanation about the whole Nashville number system. So you might want to do that later. It's pretty cool. Don't let it scare you. It's long. Like I said, it's a bit dry, but it's a great reference. Now, let's start using chords. Remember I said that notes can all be switched over to numbers. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, the same thing for chords in the Nashville number system. Chord number 1 is going to be major. Chord 2 is going to be minor. Chord 3 is going to be minor. Chord 4 is going to be major. Chord 5 is the 7th chord. Chord 6 is minor. And chord 7 is diminished. What? What the hell? What's this about a 7th? What's a diminished chord? Is there something wrong with it? Don't panic. We're okay. We're going to focus on the 3 chords that we use so much in the blues and use in rock, the 1, 4, and 5 chord. Now, you see that the 5 chord was listed as a 7th chord, and you probably know how to play a 7th chord already. I'm sure most of the chordal instruments watching this already know that. But what is it? We're going to take a little tangent here into music theory. There's a course on music theory. You might want to look at it. A 7th chord is a major chord, so it's made up of 1, 3, and 5. And there's 1 note added. What note do you think it is? Really? What note? Guess. 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 Tell me. Tell me! What is it? Better. Okay. If you said 7th, you're wrong. And here comes the theory. It's a trick question. It's a trick question because let's use a G7th chord. The name isn't really G7th. Originally, it was called a G major minor 7th chord. I can imagine myself, after a couple of jacks, saying to a keyboard, play seventh chord. Go ahead, please. No. It was actually kind of pared down to what they called, it's more often called, a dominant 7th chord or a flatted 7th chord. So it might have been called a G major dominant 7th chord, but eventually that got pared down to a G flat 7th chord or a G dominant 7th chord, and eventually we just started calling it G7th. So the 7th note, which we're adding, is not the normal 7th note, it's flatted, and it gives us this very distinctive sound. Here's a G chord, G7. And that's great if you want to get a G7th, but wait, what if you want to add a 7th that's not flatted? That's a normal, God-fearing 7th, the way that nature intended it. Well, what do you call it then? Well, the original name would have been G major, major 7th, which got shortened to a G major 7th. The word major is not referring to whether the G is major or minor. It's referring to the interval. So the obvious question is, what's an interval? An interval is the relationship between two notes. Not that kind of a relationship. Get your mind out of the gutter. Stay with me. We're almost done with the music theory part. Okay, if C is note number 1, then the interval between C and D is a major 2nd. The interval between C and E is a major 3rd, right? C, D, E. The interval between C and F is a major 4th, meaning that those are the way the notes just normally go in the scale. Nothing is being changed here. So, a major 7th means that the 7th note is not altered in any way. It's not flatted, it's a regular B note, which is the 7th step. So C major 7 means a C major chord with a major 7th added on. And it sounds like this. Here's the 7th. Right, very distinctive sound. Major 7. Very pretty, very nice sound. Can you have a C minor major 7 chord? Yes, as a matter of fact, of course you can. And you've heard it. This is a D. We're going to do this in D. You've heard it in the song. Us and them. After all, that's the minor, a D minor major 7. We're only ordinary men. To a G chord. So this is a minor major 7 chord. Play it for the kids. Go to sleep, my baby, my baby, my baby. Years of therapy. So, we were talking about the 1, 4, and 5 chord, which in the key of C would be C, F, and G7 if you can play it. Okay, if you don't, then, G, whatever, but 1, 4, and 5. What songs use these chords? Well, let's see. Johnny Be Good, Louie Louie, La Bamba, Mustang Sally, Wild Things, Stir It Up, Good Riddance, That's Not My Name, Leave My Girl Alone, Twist and Shout, Zeppelin's Rock and Roll, and hundreds, thousands and thousands more songs. It's one of the most popular, if not the most popular, chord progression out there. So what's a progression? A progression is just a series of chords played in a specific order to make up a song or part of a song. So let's look at the chord progression for Louie Louie. All right? 2 beats each. The 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, back to the 4 chord, and you keep playing it over and over again until you pass out. Now, it doesn't matter what key you're in. The relationship between the chords is always going to be the same. If you're in the key of C, all right, we said that was 1, 4, 5 would be C, F, G. If you're in the key of A is 1, A, B, C, D, right, is 4, E is 5. Doesn't matter what key you're in, E flat, B flat, G, doesn't matter, it's always 1, 4, 5. If you are thinking of songs in terms of the number that they are, the numbers of the chords and not the actual name of the chord, you can play any song in any key because the relationship will stay the same. Now, want to try and figure out what Louie Louie would be in the key of G? Do it right now. Yes, this, my friends, is music theory. And really, how long did this take? Just for us to do this part, which is kind of the basic. Less time than it takes to watch an episode of Breaking Bad or a rerun of Game of Thrones. And it's not bad, right? This was like 6 months of learning in a school. Okay, you're going to have to think a little bit right now. It's unavoidable, but this is a good start. Let's move on to the saddest of all chords. Minor chords are everywhere. Here's how to make more. We've gone over how to make a major chord. We just used the 1, 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of whatever key we're in. But what about minor chords? Major chords sound happy. Minor chords sound sad. Here's a major. Here's minor. And sometimes they don't sound sad as much as they sound a bit unsettling, which our brains find interesting. But what's the difference between a major and a minor chord? Well, it's pretty simple here, Sparky. If you lower the 3rd note a half a step, you've got a minor chord. So, for example, in the key of G for a G chord, the 3rd note is G, A, B. If we play a B flat instead of a B, it's now a G minor chord. Here's G major. Here's G minor. And it's only 1 note difference. By the way, when you're writing out, for anybody who might not be familiar with this, the little under, my hand's shaking here, because we're trying to hold this up and look at it at the same time. A lowercase b is the symbol for flat. The number sign is the symbol for sharp. You're probably going to need to know that. So why do you even need to know how to make up a minor or a major chord? What good is it going to do you? Well, let's say you're trying to improvise over a minor chord, and because you don't quite know what you're doing, you play a major scale. And believe me, I have heard this a lot. It's going to sound really bad because you're not using the right note. You're using a major note, chord from a major note, over a minor chord. So, we actually have an easy way of approaching this, but not until you learn some scales. And I'm sorry, but you're going to have to use your brain. I'm going to try and keep this to a minimum because I understand that you need to use it for things that are more important to your survival, such as how many beers are in a six-pack. But it's one of those unavoidable things if you want to progress. In order to understand which note has to be lowered, we're going to go over how you make a scale. So stay tuned. Get ready to take some notes. See what I did there? Yeah. And we'll get some learning into you. The secret formula. Hold on. Need to be a break? Okay. Scales aren't just random notes put together. Like pretty much everything else in music, they follow a pattern. You don't like patterns? Great. But you have to know what they are in order to not follow them. Sure, you got guys like Captain Beefheart who broke a lot of rules and apparently didn't really know what he was doing in the very beginning. So that's one guy out of like 20 million who did that and was successful. In the meantime, for people who actually know the rules and decided to break them or to use them, there's a lot of success stories. So let's look at what patterns make up a major scale. Let me, I just unfortunately move that out of the way. So, how to make major scales for fun and profit. Take a look at this. If you can, jot it down really quickly, but I'm going to be going over it so you'll be able to... Gee, my hand keeps shaking because I'm holding it the wrong way. Alright, we're going to go over this, so don't worry if you can't like jot it down that quick. Okay. And we're going to use the keyboard for this, because it's easier to see, because it's got those black keys on it. We're going to start with the note C. You go a whole step to the next note, which is D. You go a whole step to the next note, which is E. Now you only go a half step between the third and the fourth note. You go another whole step to the G note, another whole step to the A note, another whole step to the B note, and then between the seventh and the eighth is a half step. So between 1 and 2 is a whole step, 2 and 3 is a whole step, in between 3 and 4 it's only a half step. 4 and 5 is a whole step, 5 to 6 is a whole step, 6 to 7 is a whole step, and between 7 and 8 it is a half step. And that works. It doesn't just work for C, it works for everything. Now, this is important. If you wrote this down, or if you downloaded the manual, take a look, see what it said. If you didn't understand it, go back over it. You can move your lips if you have to, but this is important and you can't skip it, and it's really not that hard. It's not like there's a million formulas here. There's a couple, and that's one of them. Let's try the key of F. Why F and not D? I mean, we started with C, why not just go up to D? Because we're trying to do this where we're only going to have one altered note. That is a note that has to be flat or sharp, added at a time. You're welcome. So let's go up through F. F is 1. We're going to go a whole step to G. Going to go a whole step to A. Now, in between 3 and 4, we're supposed to have a half step, so we can't go to B. We've got to go to this note, which is B flat. Right, that's only a half step. Now, if we go a whole step from 4 to 5, that would be the F note, because there's nothing between E and F, right? So it's half step, whole step. F, whole step, G, whole step A, I'm sorry, E, and then a half step from E to F, and we're back. So the key of F has got one flat, and the reason why it has that flat is because it has to in order to go on with the pattern. This works, like I said, for every scale, every major scale. Now, we could go to the next scale after F, which you would think would be G. But here's the thing. F has one flat, and we said that that was a B flat. Wouldn't it be easier to think of scales in the order of the number of flats that they have instead of F, G, A, B? Well, yes, it would be. That order is called the cycle of fourths. Why? Because you count up 4 notes from the beginning of the scale, whatever one you're on, and that's going to be the next scale. Wake up! I know your eyes are glazing over. Let's bear with us. because there's an easy way of doing this. Look at the key of F that we just did. We got F, G, A, B flat. B flat is the fourth note. Okay? The next scale, F has one flat and it's B flat. Now let's look at B flat. If we did the formula, it would go like this. B flat's the first note, whole step to C, right? Whole step to D, half step to E flat, whole step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A, back to B flat. So the key of B flat has got two flats, the B flat, of course, and the fourth note, which is E flat. Okay, take a guess what the next scale is going to be. Come on, guess, guess. What is it? Yes, E flat. You're right. Huh. We can go through the whole formula and we could just count up, you know, and we can say, okay, E flat is 1, F is 2, G is 3. Well, now we go a half a step. That would be A flat. A flat is the fourth note. Then we have B flat, right? We have B flat from before. And then we have G. I'm sorry. B flat, then we have C. Yeah. Good one, Russ. Then we have D and E flat. So E key of E flat has got 3 flats. Now, we can just keep doing this, right? And you could spend like a month learning all this crap. But wouldn't it be nice if there was a handy way to remember these scales? And wouldn't you be really happy with the guy who told you about it? It just so happens that there is a mnemonic device to remember this. And that is the word bead. Take a look. Now, really, it's C has got all naturals. F has got 1 flat, and that flat is B flat. B flat has got 2 flats, B flat and E flat. E flat has got 3 flats. It's got the B flat, of course it's got the E flat, and it's got an A flat. A flat has got 4 flats, right? It's got B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. And then D flat has got 5 flats. It's got all the ones that came before, B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat, plus the new one is G flat. So if you can remember F bead in your head, it's not that hard, with a G flat at the end, then really you just learn the cycle of fourths, and at least as far as it pertains to all the keys that have flats in them. Now, the key of G flat, we stop there, right? The key of G flat, the next note after that, let's count up, G, A, B, C, would be a C flat. You say C flat, isn't that just a B, right? Because there's no C flat? Well, yes, it is. But G flat is one of those weird cases where you have to use C flat instead of B or it doesn't make sense. Because you can't repeat a note in a scale. You can't have like B flat and B. It's got to be B flat and then C flat. You can't have A and A flat. It would be too confusing. You would never be able to write this stuff out. So we have to do things that are a little unusual. So there really isn't a good alternative for keys like G flat. My suggestion is if somebody wants you to play something in G flat, hit them hard. So we've got 7 keys out of 12. Woo! All right. How are we going to actually use this in playing? Well, we're going to get to that. But we have to cover the other 5 keys first. So really what you're going to do is, on your own time, you're going to figure out, like in A flat, how do you make an A flat major or minor chord? And you'll do that by thinking about what flats are in the key of A flat. We don't have time to do it right now. But don't panic. Listen, I understand that this is getting a bit into the, into the rough here, but this is the foundation for what we need to do to understand other things that are going to be coming up. Now, what about the not flat key? Well, we're going to do the rest of them. You can collect the whole set. All the kids are doing it. We've got the key C, F, B flat, A flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and G flat. So, let's see now. We still have the keys of G, G, C, G, B, A, E, B, and F sharp. C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp. Look at that order. Does that remind you of anything? Compare this to that. Take a look. Notice anything? It's the reverse. That's right. This is the cycle of fifths. That's the cycle of fourths. The cycle of fifths is what we're using to remember the natural keys. It's C, G, and the word bead backwards. But how are we gonna, does this also use like the fourth note is different? No. In the cycle of fifths for the natural scales, it's actually a little easier. The note before the key that you're in is the note that gets sharped. Because we're not doing flats now, we already did the flats. Now we're talking about keys that have sharps in them. So let's use the formula and go through the key of G. Here's G. We go a whole step. A. We go a whole step. B. E. Yeah, B. I was right. Sorry, B. We go a half step. Between 3 and 4 is a half step. C. Whole step D. Whole step E. Now we have to go another whole step, which means F is not the right note, right? Because that's only a half step. It's F sharp. And then a half step from F sharp to G. Again, we're just following the formula. So when we're talking about the cycle of fifths, so we're talking about the keys that use sharps in them, it's going to be the note before whatever key you're in gets sharped, plus any notes that might have come before it. So let's take a look at this again. The next one will be the key of D. The key of D will have the F sharp in it and the key of G. And what's the note before D? Come on, I know you can figure this one out. It's C sharp. There you go. So we've got F sharp, two sharps, F sharp and C sharp. Key of A has got three sharps. It's got the F sharp, it's got the C sharp, and the note before A is G, so it has a G sharp. You know, people talk about cycles. Oh, the cycle of fifths, the cycle of fourths. It's this. It's a tool. It's like a slide rule, except not as useful. Right? It's nothing to be paranoid about or thinking like, well, I don't understand it. There's not that much to understand. It's just a way that you can remember the scales without sitting there and having to actually kind of like memorize and say like, okay, let me figure out let me see, a B scale. How does it? It's just a quick way of remembering what it is. Speaking of which, figure out a B scale, okay? This isn't rocket science. We're just following a pattern. We need to know what notes are in the scale in order to figure out how to do chords and how to improvise, especially other more sophisticated chords. Let's say you have a G scale, right? That had one sharp in it. And you raise it up to be a G sharp scale. This is important. That means that everything is now sharped, plus the F, which was already sharped, is now a double sharp. And yes, there is such a thing as a double sharp. Antibiotics will not fix it. Well, that would be pretty horrible. Even if you can't read music, okay? G sharp is also what? It's higher than G, but it's lower than A. So a G sharp is also an A flat. Even if you can't read music, this is what G sharp looks like if you write it out, and that's what A flat looks like. That's this key signature that you would put at the beginning of a bar. G sharp looks horrible. A flat is better. It's less complicated. It's got 4 flats. So we were saying, how do you know when to call something a sharp or a flat? Well, when it makes sense. I mean, look, if you're, playing with people and you say, oh, let's play this in D sharp. If you're playing with people who actually know what they're doing, you're going to get a lot of really filthy looks. But if you say, hey, let's play this in E flat, well, then everybody kind of relaxes. You get a lot of happy horn players, and the guitar players will look at you and bitch, and they'll say, well, why don't you just play it in E? Okay, because that works better on guitar. And yes, there are keys that work better on certain instruments, and that's because of the way that they're laid out. But we'll talk about that in a bit. So, now we know how to make a scale. We know how many altered sharp or flat notes are in that scale, and we have a mnemonic, a way of, clue that we can use in order to remember it. Whoop-de-doo. What do we actually do with this? Well, here's what you won't do. You won't bring it up at parties to impress your friends. You won't be mumbling it at your day job as you walk down the hall, and you won't try to entertain the kids with it. Okay? It's like knowing how to use a candy thermometer or a jigsaw, which, granted, can get pretty complicated. It's a tool that you will use when you need it. And to be able to use it, you have to actually know it. Let's say you improvise in a song in a song in the key of A flat, and we'll be touching on improvisation. Okay? If you don't know what the notes in that key are, you're going to be hunting and pecking, or you're just going to be using patterns that you've used for a long time without actually knowing why you're using them. And you won't be able to expand on that. You'll just keep saying, can I play something else? And maybe you'll hit a note by accident that you'll say, oh, that was cool, I wonder what that was. Because you don't know why you're playing what you're playing. You have to reinvent the wheel every time. And while that actually works for some people, it is probably better to have a clue. How good are you at your instrument? Do you know where all the notes are? String players, a lot of string players don't. If you're a singer, do you understand why some keys are better for you to sing in than others, and what your options are if you're going to be in a different key? If a note doesn't sound right, do you know why? Do you know how to fix it? Learn this, and you will. It takes practice. You might learn this, and 6 months from now you'll forget it. That's okay. This isn't a college class, it's a reference, and it's meant to be referred back to. I learned how to do binary math some time ago so I could learn about what's called subnetting for computers. Long story. Anyway, I learned it, and I was good at it, and I forgot it. And I learned it again a couple of years later, and I was good at it, and I forgot it. And I learned it again, because I pretty much never used it. The same is true of the song Stella by Starlight, which I've probably learned and forgotten at least 10 times in my life. Because I learn it, and then it gets called on a gig, and I'm like, oh man, okay, I'll learn that song, and then nobody calls it again for 5 years. So you get the idea. If you don't use something, you forget it. Here's how I remember the scales. Here in New York, we had, before DJs came in and destroyed it, a whole industry built on playing weddings and bar mitzvahs and corporate gigs and country clubs. It all fell under the umbrella name of club dates, which can be confusing because you might think of this as playing at nightclubs, but it wasn't. First of all, it paid a lot more, usually. And second, you didn't have to worry about turnout because it was a built-in crowd. And third, a lot of people like me were freelancers. That meant no rehearsals. You show up to the gig, you're expected to know a few hundred songs off the top of your head, and you're supposed to have learned whatever special requests there were on your own time. No rehearsing, you just be ready to play it without going over it when you got there with the rest of the band. At any rate, when you're on a stage, perhaps with 5 or 7 or 15 other musicians, and you want to call out a tune, you have to be heard, right? And if you call out a key, that can get tricky. C on a crowded stage can sound like D or E or B to someone who's across from the stage. So instead we use hand signals. You hold up your hand to show your fingers to show the number of sharps or flats in that key. But here in New York, there was a trick. Holding fingers up for flats and holding fingers pointing down at the ground for sharps. Which, if you think about it, makes absolutely no sense. Pretty much everywhere else, you point down for flats because they're lower than, and you point up for sharps because they are higher than. But we have to be bitches about it, so it's reversed. And then you know who the non-New York players are. Now, this might not be the real explanation, but it's the only one I've ever heard that sounds right. So if you hold up one finger, you're in the key of F because F has one flat, or you're calling out an F chord. If the fingers are pointed down, it's D if you're putting 2 fingers down, because D has got 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. Once I played with a German Oompa band, and I mean, lederhosen, the whole deal with them. I just dressed in a tuxedo. And I gotta say, it kind of sounds kind of silly, but when these guys were playing the German stuff, it was cool. They played the chicken dance. I never heard it played like that before. It was like serious business. It was actually very, very cool. But at any rate, I called out Working in a Coal Mine in the key of D. And because they were not New York players, they assumed that it was the key of B flat. It did not sound good. But here's the thing. It's a great way to use the key signatures and reinforce the flats and the sharps. Take chords of a song that you know, like let's say Louie Louie again, and signal what the actual chords are for whatever key you're playing in. By the way, for C, you just curl your fingers like that. It's C, okay? But for F sharp or G flat, well, to be honest, it's not very common to be calling those things out. Normally, it's going to be lowered or raised to a normal God-fearing key like, F or G. So anyway, if you want to signal chords for Louie Louie in the key of A, let's say, you would, in New York, you would hold down 3 fingers for A, right? 2 fingers for D, and 4 fingers for E. Right? A has got 3 sharps, D has got 2 sharps, E has got 4 sharps. So, what about minor chords? We'll get to that next, but seriously, this is a good way to learn your key signatures and to practice them. Try it out, and we're going to get into more technical theory from here on, and we'll, then wrap everything up. If you're unsure about anything that we've talked about up until now, I'm not saying that you haven't memorized. I'm just saying if you're unsure about what I've said, download the manual, go over it, or just rewind this later on and go over it. Because if you're unsure because you got the memory of a goldfish, you can go back and review it. That's like me. If you're unsure because you can't actually be bothered to learn it, and you just wanted to get stuffed into your head without any effort on your part, well, sorry, Wilbur, doesn't work that way. But if you rewatch this, you can pause it at any time and learn as much as you feel like you need to learn. Just remember that the more you learn, the more options are going to open up for you. Now, let's move on. When a minor is a major, let's take a look at a minor scale, because we already know major scales. I'm talking about single, simple, straightforward, no-nonsense minor scales, because, believe it or not, there are different kinds of minor scales. I know, it's so stupid. There's the straightforward or natural minor scale, where the third note, remember a minor, you drop the third note half a step? The third note is dropped half a step, so it's the flatted third. also the 7th note is flatted. And the A, or the 6th note, is also flatted. Oh, and that's what the heck? How is that natural? Plus, it throws the whole formula off, right? You don't have that whole step, half step thing. So, wait a minute, what happened to the formula? Well, it's still there. But we have to start on a different note. If you're looking at it, if we do what we just said in the key of C and we flat the 3, the 6th, and the 7, we end up with a B flat, an E flat, and an A flat. 3 flats. What key is that? That's E flat. So a C minor scale is actually exactly the same as an E flat major scale. This is called the relative relationship. C minor is the relative minor of E flat major, and E flat major is the relative major of C minor. So why would you ever call it C minor instead of E flat major? Because the tonal center is around the minor chord. Think of Stairway to Heaven, right? That's A minor. We don't think of it in the key of C. Or My Funny Valentine, which is in C minor. Or All Along the Watchtower is in A minor. We don't think of All Along the Watchtower as being in the key of C, even though A minor is the relative minor. It's got the exact same notes as the C scale. We think of it as A minor. So really, Hotel California starts off in D minor, but then when it goes to the chorus, it changes to F major, which is the relative major of D minor, and the chorus sounds more up than the verse. We haven't really changed keys. D minor and F major are really the same key, but the sound of the song is different in the D minor part than it is in the F major part. Well, so really it is based on the tonal center, and that's how we decide. Now there's also a harmonic minor scale. Are your eyes glazing over yet? Because mine are. I've used harmonic minor scales, but not because I thought, hey, I think I'll use a harmonic minor scale here. No, I did it because either I hit the wrong note or I heard it in my head and I played it out loud. But to make a harmonic minor scale, you raise the 7th note to make it a natural 7th, but you keep the 3rd and the 6th flatted. Lastly, there's the melodic minor scale. And in this one, you raise the 6th and the 7th, so that the only one flatted is the 3rd. And you use it usually only when you're going up the scale and not down. Oh yeah, please. So for both the harmonic and the melodic minor, there's actually a really good reason to use them. If you're playing jazz or even in rock and even in blues, it creates a lot of tension. So it's out of the ordinary. It's not what you would normally hear over like a minor chord, and it's a haunting kind of a sound. So just file that in the back of your mind to something that you might want to check out and look into and hear how other people are using it when you get deeper into improvisation. One problem that a lot of people talk about in the blues is that, well, I'm playing the same thing over and over again and I'm improvising off a blues scale and I don't really know where to go. There's plenty of places to go. You just have to understand why you're going there so that you can do it again. Alright, we've covered a lot. Alright? At this point, you know how to make a scale, you know how to make a major chord, you know how to make a minor chord, 7th chord, major 7th, you know how to make a chord scale, you know that is, major chord, minor chord, all that stuff. By the way, I didn't even play that for you. I'm going to play that real quick. This is a chord scale. Remember back when we were talking about that? Instead of just using notes, we're going to use full chords. So. Now that 7th chord was a diminished. So what is a diminished chord? A diminished is actually a 4-note chord. It's sort of a super minor chord if you want to think of it that way. The 3rd note's flatted, so is the fifth note. And so is the flatted seventh. That's right. The seventh note is flatted twice. So it's a flatted seventh. If you flat the seventh note twice, what note does it become? Take 7, lower it, now lower it again. It is a sixth note. But we don't think of it as a sixth note. We think of it as a double flatted seventh, and I'll get into that in 1 second. The thing about diminished chords is that you can call it by the name of any of the notes that are in it. So a C diminished chord is made up of C, E flat, which is the flatted third, G flat, which is the flatted fifth, and B flat, flat, which is the double flatted seventh. So you could call it a C diminished, or you could call it an E flat diminished, or you could call it a G flat diminished, or you could call it an A, that's B flat flatted again, diminished. So that would be this. They're all the same chord. So really, if you think about it, right, you've got 4 notes. There's only 12 notes. Divide 12 by 4. That means that we really only have 3 diminished chords, because each chord can be called 4 different names. So we only have 3 different diminished chords. So, you know, why do we call it a double flatted? Why do we call it a double flatted seventh? Why don't we just call it a sixth? What the hell would you call the chord? A C minor sixth chord with a flatted fifth? Eesh, that's not nice. It's a lot easier to just call it a C diminished chord, all right? And plus, you can call it any of the other names, and it all kind of works out. So, did you see what we did there with the alternate name for a diminished chord? The name actually tells us what notes are in the chord. Let's try this with a C7 plus 5 chord. We've got a regular C chord, right? We add the flatted 7, because it's a C7th chord, and then it's telling us C7 plus 5 chord. It's saying, take that the 5 note, and make it sharp. Raise it. And it sounds like this. The name of the chord is actually telling us how to play it. Okay? How about a C ninth chord? Well, the ninth note is the same as the second note, right? I mean, let's count it. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. So D is the same, you know, it's a 2 and it's also a 9. So why don't we just call it a C second chord? Because we put the flatted 7 in there. Any number higher than 7 assumes that there's already a flatted 7 in there, unless it's got the word major in it. So a C major ninth would have a major, a major 7th in it, and it would also have the D in it. Very pretty simple. Whereas this would be a C9. So you can hear the difference between that. If we were to not have the 7th in there, and we wanted to add a D to a C chord, then yeah, then we would call it a C suspended second. And what would happen is, and this is something that most people are familiar with, but they don't really like, you use the 4th as a suspended, not the 2nd, but you can use the 2nd. Here's a D chord, right? How many times have you done this? Where you just go. That note, that G note, is the 4th note in the key of D, and it's covering over the 3rd note. So this isn't major or minor. It's not a major note, it's not a major chord, it's not a minor chord, because there's no 3rd in it. The 4th note is suspending it, it's covering it. So we don't know what kind of chord it's going to resolve to. It could go, or it could go, let's go this house. Okay. Same thing if we're using the second note. Or, so we have two kinds of suspended chords. One uses the fourth to take the place of the third. One uses the second to take the place of the third. But if we add the seventh into it, if we put in the flatted seventh or the major seventh, then now we have to bump it up an octave. So instead of calling it a D second suspended chord, we call it a D ninth chord. Does that make sense? You cool with that? Okay. What about a C7 augmented 9? It's telling you how to make the chord. You play a C7 chord, you add the ninth note, and you sharp it. And you've heard this chord. A lot of people think of it as the Hendrix chord. Here's an E9, and here's an E7 augmented 9. Here's an E7 flat 9. So, when you see these chords, you have to understand that these are substitutes for a seventh chord. You're tired of playing a seventh chord? You want to play something else in its place? These are chords that you can use. You don't need to get kind of, scared off of that. What about a D minor 7 flat 5 chord? It's a D minor chord with a flatted 7 added, and you flat the fifth note. And this is something that we use a lot if we want to go resolve to a minor chord. So you have, you could just go, or, but doesn't this sound a lot cooler? The name of the chord is actually telling you how to play it. Alright, we're getting close to the end here. I'm going to go over something real basic, because sometimes people, believe it or not, do not know this. You heard the term bar. Not that bar. A musical bar. No, not a karaoke bar. Okay, this is the kind of bar where you count while you're playing music. Music is a combination of tones and rhythm, or at least most music is. In order to have rhythm, you have to figure out how many beats a portion of those tones should be spread out over. For example, the famous 1, 2, 3, 4 that every band in the world uses is basically saying each segment of this song will take up 4 beats, and it's going to go this fast unless we're playing with a drummer who couldn't keep the same tempo if he put a gun to his head. So let's take a song like Johnny B. Good. Alright? The lyrics go, down in Louisiana, and if you tap your foot, it'll tap 4 times. Down in Louisiana, up in, that's 1 bar. And then, New Orleans, that's another bar. 4 beats. We call this 4/4 time, which looks, when you write it out, like that. Okay, you notice the 4 and the 4, and then there's 4 little, things there. Each one of those is a quarter note. The top number refers to the number of beats in the bar, or the measure. It's the same thing. The bottom number tells us what kind of note equals 1 beat. So here's where it gets a bit weird. What kind of note? Well, they had to figure out some way of knowing how long a note was going to last. So somewhere along the line, around 1600 or so, the system came about which basically said, there's a whole note. However long that whole note lasts, if it lasts for 2 seconds or 2 hours, a half note is going to be equal to half of that time. And a quarter note is going to be equal to a quarter of a whole note. And an eighth note is going to be equal to an eighth note. Eighth of a whole note. And a million trillionth note will be equal to sour eggs and mustard. Generally, we stop at 32nd notes, although there are 64th and 128th and even 256th notes that have been used generally by sadists and lunatics, I would think. So, here's the thing. If you decide you got to decide how long one beat's going to last, the amount of time it takes you to count one, and if you always use whole notes for that, sheet music is going to look pretty weird. So by popular demand, the quarter note is usually, but not always, used to determine how long a beat's going to be. For example, if you count off 1, 2, 3, 4, that means that each quarter note will take the amount of time it took you to say 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. A whole note will last however long it took you to say the whole 1, 2, 3, 4 phrase. That's a whole note. Do we always have 4 beats to the bar? No. Think of a waltz. It has 3 beats. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Think of any 1950s slow ballad, like You Belong to Me or Silhouette. That has 12 beats to the bar. And we count it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And an eighth note is equal to 1 beat. That is, when you're writing out the music, you think of it as an eighth note being 1 beat, and there are 12 eighth notes per measure. So the point is, in order to make music, it's helpful if you can count to 4 and know how long a measure is supposed to be. Now, we're going to quickly go over chord progressions. When you string a bunch of chords together, it's called a progression. We covered the common 1-4-5 progression. If you play 4 bars of the 1 chord, 2 bars of the 4 chord, back to 2 bars of the 1 chord, then 1 bar each of 5, 4, 1, and 5, you're playing a 12-bar blues, and we've all done it. It is the Blues Society, after all. Those are also the chords to like a few million songs, including ones that are on the radio and streaming right this very second. So are there millions of progressions? Thankfully, no, there are not. There are certain patterns that repeat themselves, and you can combine them to get a song. So going to the 1 to the 4 chord is very common, as is going from the 1 to the 5 chord. You mush that around and you get 1, 4, 5, 1, 5, 4, 1, 5, 4, 5, stuff like that. Wild Thing is just 1, 4, 5, and so is The Tide is Honey. It's just the progression. Now, there's also a very popular resolution, which is 2, 5, 1. That's the 2nd chord, the 5th chord, and the 1 chord. And it's used to get back to the 1 chord if you go someplace else first, like the 4 chord. Like, let's say you're doing this. Instead of just going, it gives you a chance to do something a little different, and it of course doesn't always fit. That's up to you to decide. The 5 chord usually is going to resolve to the 1 chord. I say usually, but not always. For example, there's lots of songs that go to the 2 to the 5, but they never actually go back to the 1 chord. An example of this might be Oyo Como Va, right? A minor to D, or A minor 7 to D9. It never actually goes to the G, although it's the 2-5 of the G, but it never resolves to it. So, let me see. Remember that we have the relative major to minor chord. That is also a progression. So, we had C, and I said that A minor was the relative minor. That's a progression. Let me see. That's been used on stuff like Tears on My Pillow and Hallelujah, Dire Maker. A whole bunch of songs use that stuff. A less common, but still pretty common, resolution is 1 to 3. If you remember, the 3 chord is supposed to be minor, so it sounds like this. And you've heard that, right, on the weight and things things like that. But, sometimes the 3 chord will be a major chord, and we'll go over that in a second. So you could take these common resolutions and you can make millions, I'm not kidding, millions of songs by combining them. And that, by the way, is why you cannot copyright chord progressions. There really aren't that many of them, and it's pretty much impossible to come up with a new combination of chords. So your job is to learn to recognize these chord resolutions. Listen, if you can recognize these resolutions, and there aren't that many of them, you can learn any song as soon as you hear it. I'm not kidding. You can hear a tune on the radio, and if you can recognize what those chord combinations are, and it's not that hard, just takes a little practice, you'll be able to figure out any song. Okay. So this is all pretty cool. Now, the real thing is resolutions to resolutions. Remember how I said that sometimes the 3rd chord can be used as a major? That's because resolutions are about where you're going, not where you've been. I'm going to repeat that. Resolutions are about where you're going, not where you've been. Burt Bacharach was great at this. If you look at some of his sheet music, you'll look at it and go, those chords don't really make any sense. But if you think of it in those terms, they make perfect sense and they sound great. Songs like Alfie, they're great tunes, and they make sense when you think of it this way. The chord number 3, whatever that might be, the 3rd chord, might have nothing to do with the chord that came before it, but it goes really well to the chord that follows it. So we've got a song in C. That's the 1 chord. The 3 chord should be E minor. 3 in the key of C is E minor. But we're going to play in E7. Why? Because the next chord is going to be A, and E7 is the 5 of A, and it goes to A. Now we're going to take the A, make it an A7, so it goes to D, because A is the 5 of D. Now we're going to take the D, make it a D7, so that it goes to G, because D is the 5 of G. I'm going quick here. G7 brings us back to C. So we have okay? Chord resolution is about where you are going. You can do this all day. You can make up some pretty weird tunes, and it doesn't matter what genre you're in. Listen to Dangerous Mood, Kev Mo. It's got a couple of weird resolutions, but they make perfect sense if you think about it in this way. Okay? Now, people sometimes say, this key doesn't work on my instrument. Well, yes it does, but certain instruments, keys work better on certain instruments. For instance, on guitar, it's easier to play in the key of E and A and G than, say, E flat, A flat, and D flat. Why? Because physically, the guitar uses open strings that make playing in those keys easier. Like you have, like you got that open E, which is probably be better if it was in tune. If you want to do that in D flat, you don't get that low open string. It doesn't sound as good. For horn players have to transpose everything. That's right, kids. Most of us think in concert, which means that a C note is the note that you hit on a piano that looks like a C. But for horn players, a C note is actually the B flat note on the piano or the E flat note, depending on what wind instrument they're playing. Now think about that. That means that if you're playing in the key of E, the horn player either has to play an F sharp, remember what I said to do if anybody asks you to play an F sharp? Okay, or C sharp, which is the same as D flat. Both keys kind of suck, lots of sharps and flats. And yeah, they're used to it, but it still sucks. That's why horn players will give you a dirty look when you call a song in the key of E. What about A? They still give you a dirty look. Why? figure it out. Okay, we're almost done. We're just going to cover a couple more quick things. Improvising. You've gone through a lot of that learning stuff, and you may forget a lot of it, but you can review the online manual or just look at this again. Let's say you have a song in the key of A that uses the 1, 4, and let's say it uses the 1, 6, 4, and 5 chords. How do you solo over that? So that would be... Well, you can play a blues scale. And what is a blues scale, really? Well, a blues scale in the key of A is C, A, G, E, D. Notice anything? No sharps, no flats, right? They're all natural notes. So a blues scale in the key of A is really just part of a C scale, a C natural scale. Yeah, I know there's this passing tone, if you got it. Right? But that's not really part of the scale, it's passing tone. And what's the relationship between C and A? Hence, it's actually A minor. Right. It's C is the relative major, so it's a relative major minor thing. So a blues scale is really just 5 notes of the A minor scale, which is basically a C scale. So going back to improvisation, what chords do we have there? In the key of A, you have A, F sharp minor, right? 1, 6, D, and E7. Now follow this. If the key of A has a C sharp in it, right, which is the 3rd note, and it's important because the C sharp, the 3rd note, determines whether we're going to be major or minor. So a blues scale in the key of A is using C, not C sharp, right, which makes it a minor scale. Now normally this might be okay because it's also a sharp 9 note, which gives it kind of a jarring, funky sound. But then we have an F sharp minor scale, F sharp minor chord coming up, and that has C sharp as the 5 note. We can't change that, right? That's the 5th note. So we're kind of locked into an A major scale, and if you hit that C with it, that sounds horrible. Yeah? So you can't really use the blues scale on this once you get up to that F sharp minor chord, because it's going to sound like crap. So what can we do? How do we play over this? Simple, really. We're still going to play a blues scale. A minor, the A blues scale, the relative major was C. So if you think of A and you go down to the relative minor of A, that would be the 6th step in the key of A, right? A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. That means an F sharp blues scale is really just an A scale. That's all it is. So it's kind of, country sounding or major sounding. So we have this. And we're playing a blues scale. But if we play an F sharp blues scale, we can improvise now over something that really is in the key of A. I call it the country blues because it's got kind of a country sound. Does it work over, bluesy, funky stuff? Well, yes, actually, yes, it does. So you can mix the two together. The only thing to remember is that when you're playing the country blues, you wanna stay away from that C note, because it is probably not going to work that great. Okay, so these kind of things, understanding what it is, you want to have the choice. You want to have that crappy sound because you're trying to do like a cool kind of like move there, Fine. You know, if you're playing like, for instance, and you want to go, you're doing that on purpose. You know that that note is out, but you might like the way that sounds. Okay? This is how you're going to be using this stuff. What about jazz? Well, jazz generally is going to center around a particular key. The thing is, that key might change halfway through the song. Again, it's where you're going, not where you came from. One of the most famous groundbreaking tunes is Have You Met Miss Jones, which has a pretty strange middle part, which the middle is called the bridge. It influenced John Coltrane in his composition of the song Giant Steps, which is not only a really cool song, but it's kind of a test of improvisational skills for any aspiring jazz player. I'm not going to cover it here, but if you look in Wikipedia under Coltrane changes, exactly that, not Giant Steps, not John Coltrane, Coltrane changes, you're going to get the best explanation of Giant Steps I have ever seen. And now that you've gone through this course, you're going to be able to understand what they're talking about. Alright? There are many approaches to improvising jazz, and that's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But you now should be able to see that some of the sophisticated chords that you might use, and that's an actual term, sophisticated chords, such as an A minor 7 flat 9, written as A minor 7 with a dash 9, and understand what it is and how to play it. It also gives you a clue as to what notes you need to improvise with, and this is important. What are the important notes in a, let's say, A minor 7, or an A minor 9th chord? What are the important notes that you need in that? Well, let's see now. The notes that are altered, or the notes that are different, are the important notes. A is not that important because it doesn't matter what kind of chord, if it's an A major, A minor 7, it's still going to have an A in it. The fifth note, which is E, is not that important because unless the name of the chord tells you that you're changing the 5, it's going to be a 5 note, whether it's an A major, an A minor 7, A major, so it doesn't matter. The notes that are different are the notes that you want to concentrate on. So an A minor 9th chord would have the flat 3rd, which is C instead of C sharp, the flat 7, which is G instead of G sharp, and the B note. So those are the notes that you're going to kind of want to, if you can, because you're playing, you're going fast, you're doing stuff, but you might look at it and go, oh yeah, let me just throw that in because it establishes that kind of a chord. All right? I'm not going to get too deep into this, but again, it is something that you can go over. So what if it's an A minor 7 augmented 9 chord? That's a trick question. You go over it and you figure out why you will never ever see an A minor 7 augmented 9 chord. Okay. Last thing. It's all about that bass. The bass is the bridge between the drums, which is percussion, and the rest of the band. As a bassist or a songwriter or as a band leader or a sideman, you should be aware of what the bass player is doing. Their job is to play with the drummer, but it's also to be a melodic bridge to the band. If the keyboard player is hitting all these really nice chords, but he runs out of fingers because everybody knows that a keyboard player needs 2 hands, one to play with and one to put in their pocket or hold a beer with, then the bassist can hold down the fort. How? Because we have to think about what notes are important. Is the 3 important? Well, yeah, the 3 is important because it tells us if it's major or minor. What about the 5? Well, it could be if it's altered, if it's a minor 7 flat 5 chord. The 7th? Yeah. It determines if the chord's a flat, dominant 7th or a major 7th. What about the 1? Like the A in an A chord. It's not that important. Because it can't change. It's the 1 note. It's always going to be an A. So if the bassist plays that, he's establishing the root, or the bass, the tonic, for the 1 chord, which means everybody then can build on top of that. if the bass player is busy doing like a Jocko imitation, what have you got to build on? It works in certain kinds of music. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. And Jocko was great. But Jocko knew what he was doing. He knew when he could do that and when he didn't, when it was important to establish the chord. The other thing would be, let's say that, the chord is an A minor 7 flat 5. If the bass player is playing a 1 and a 5, and he's not flatting that 5, it's not going to sound good. My father had a saying, to put this in focus. He said, if the drum is bad and the bassist is good, then it's the drummer's fault. But if the drum is good and the bassist is bad, it's the drummer's fault. You know why? Because a great drummer can make a bad bass player sound good. But no matter how good the bassist is, he can't make a bad drummer sound good. And I've had that happen to me personally. I played with Bernard Purdy on a number of gigs, and I was playing bass. And on one of them, the band leader came up to me after, and he said, have you been practicing? Because you sounded great. Thanks. And I pointed at Bernard, and I said, it's him. He made me sound better. All right. Well, anyway, the point is, the bass player can make or break the band. We've covered a lot. Okay? We've gone from not having a clue what anything is to, relationships between chords. Don't get sappy. All right. But now you have a basic idea of music theory and essentials. Here's the thing. If you don't use it, you'll forget it. My suggestions are, use the finger method to practice remembering your scales. Hold up the appropriate number of fingers to call out chords, even if it's just to yourself. Be aware of what notes you're playing. Try to picture how they're going to relate to the chords that you're playing that are going behind you. Experiment with notes that don't fit and see how you like them. Then figure out why you like them. And maybe it's the way that you're doing it or the way that you put those in between notes. Create some harmonies. Take a melody like, I don't know, Blackbird or Frere Jacques. It's a little easier. Harmonize it. Find the 3 and the 5 and the 1 or whatever. Find out whatever one of those notes you're not singing and make that, make it into a harmony. Pay attention to what other people are playing. If you hear a great riff, if you can, I carry my phone with me with a recorder, and sometimes I'm in a club and I'll hear somebody playing and I'll be like, oh man, I'll start recording it, and then I'll listen to it when I get home and say, well, what was that guy doing? Sometimes I'll be surprised and be, oh, that's a riff that I've been playing for years. I just didn't recognize it. But sometimes I'll be, wow, that's really pretty cool. Listen to the bass parts. See how they're working against the chords that are being used. And like I said, I've been at chopping walls, and I've heard some amazing stuff that just come on in between all the pap. And I'll record it, and I'll listen to it later, and I'll go, wow, that's really cool. And you want to try and figure out songs. Try and figure things out as much as you can. Don't buy the sheet music. Don't go online. A lot of the times, you'll go online and you'll see a song where the actual chords are E minor 7 to an A13 to a D major 7, but the transcribed chords are A7 to D. It's not the same. All right? This is just one more tool in your arsenal. Is knowing music theory going to make you a great player? No, it is not. Is it going to make you a better player than you otherwise would have been? Yes, it will. Is it going to open up some things for you that maybe you didn't have access to before? Absolutely. Yes, it will. It's going to enable you to be happier with what you're doing. I have known some great players who had no idea what they were doing and played great. Of course, generally, they'd be very paranoid, just as a rule. I've known different guys, and they'd always be unsure about what was going to happen on the gig because they didn't really know what they were doing. I've known guys who could spout music theory from, here to eternity, and they can't improvise over a blues. I'm not kidding. So will it make you a great player? No. But it will give you more opportunities. It's a tool. like anything else. It's up to you how you use it. I hope you found this, if not enjoyable, then at least instructive. One more time, you can download this entire thing in Word format with audible examples. You can download it from here. Please feel free to do so. I'm doing this just like to help and maybe, improve. People said they don't have to sit through a college class because, God, I hate sitting in class. And that's pretty much it. Guys, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for bearing with me, and I will speak with you later.